Hello, everyone, friends. I hope you enjoy listening to and watching this interesting story. Do you remember the first time you saw television? Not just watched it, but truly saw it. When that glowing box was something more than furniture, more than entertainment, when it was magic itself sitting right there in your living room. For most of us, that memory is woven into the fabric of our childhood. But for our parents and grandparents, television wasn't just new, it was revolutionary. It was the moment when the whole world, for the first time in human history, could come right into your home. This is the story of how it happened, the story of ordinary American families who witnessed something extraordinary, the story of the first television. Picture America in 1948. The war had been over for 3 years, and the country was catching its breath. Young men had returned from Europe and the Pacific, rolled up their sleeves, and gotten to work building the future. Factories that had churned out bombers and tanks now produced refrigerators and automobiles. New houses sprouted like dandelions across the suburbs. Cape Cods and ranch homes with neat lawns and picket fences. Inside these homes, life moved to a different rhythm than the one you might remember. Mothers wore house dresses and aprons, even when they weren't expecting company. Fathers came home promptly at 6 o'clock, hung their hats on the rack by the door, and called out, "Honey, I'm home." Children played kick the can in the street until the streetlights flickered on, then tumbled inside, grass-stained and breathless. In the evenings, families gathered around the radio, that tall wooden cabinet with its glowing dial, and listened together. The Lone Ranger galloped through their imaginations. Jack Benny made them laugh. Edward R. Murrow brought them the news in that grave, cigarette-roughened voice. The radio was the center of home life, the hearth around which the modern family assembled. But something was stirring. In department store windows, crowds pressed their noses to the glass, staring at something new. A box with a small round screen, usually showing a test pattern or a wrestling match. People stood 3 deep on the sidewalk, transfixed. Most had never seen anything like it. They called it television, and it was about to change everything. In 1948, fewer than 1% of American homes had a television set. By 1955, that number would climb to 65%. No technology in history had spread so fast, not even the automobile or the telephone. But in those early days, owning a television wasn't simple. A standard Philco console cost about $500. That's nearly $6,000 in today's money. For a working family making $75 a week, it was a staggering sum. A television cost as much as a used car, as much as 3 months' rent. Still, people found ways. They saved, they scrimped, some bought on installment plans, paying it off month by month. Because this wasn't just about entertainment. It was about status, about being modern, about giving your children a window to the wider world. And oh, how the neighbors noticed. In the summer of 1949, the Hendersons became the first family on Maple Street to get a television. Within an hour, word had spread up and down the block. By evening, half the neighborhood had found a reason to stop by. We were just passing and thought we'd say hello. The kids wanted to see if Tommy could come out to play. I baked an extra pie and figured you might like a slice. Everyone wanted a peek at that miraculous screen. The aerial on the roof became a status symbol. You could walk down any street in America and immediately identify which homes had television. Those tall metal antennas reaching skyward like technological prayers. The bigger the aerial, the better the reception. The better the reception, the more bragging rights you had. Television brought people together in unexpected ways. Families who barely knew their neighbors suddenly became best friends on Milton Berle night. Tuesday evenings, living rooms filled with 15, 20 people, all squeezing onto couches and sitting on the floor, laughing at Uncle Milty's ridiculous costumes and vaudeville antics. "Move over, I can't see." "Shh, I think he's about to do his walrus impression." "Martha, did you bring those deviled eggs?" The television set became a social hub, a reason to gather, a shared experience that bound communities together. For the Miller family, George, Helen, and their 3 children, Bobby, Susan, and little Carol, the decision came in October 1949. George Miller worked as an insurance adjuster. Steady work that paid the bills, but didn't leave much extra. Helen kept a careful household, clipping coupons, mending clothes, making a chuck roast stretch across 3 meals. They weren't poor, but they weren't comfortable either. One Saturday afternoon, George brought the family downtown to Goldstein's department store. The kids pressed their noses against the window display, where 3 television sets glowed with the same image. A cowboy show, all in black and white, slightly snowy, but moving, actually moving right there in the box. Can we get one, Dad? Can we? Bobby's breath fogged the glass. George looked at Helen. She gave him that look, the one that said they both knew the answer, even if neither wanted to say it out loud. That evening, after the children were in bed, George and Helen sat at the kitchen table with the bills spread before them. The Formica table had a pattern of red boomerangs. It was the newest thing when they'd bought it 2 years ago. Helen's fingers drummed on that surface as she did the calculations in her head. We've got $70 in the savings account, she said quietly. And with Christmas coming, I know. George lit a cigarette, something he only did when he was thinking hard. But Helen, did you see their faces? The world's changing. I don't want our kids to be the only ones on the block without what? A television? George, we've got a perfectly good radio. It's not the same. Television it's education, it's culture, it's $500 we don't have. The cigarette glowed in the dim kitchen light. Outside, a dog barked. George stubbed out the cigarette and took his wife's hand. What if I take that overtime they've been offering? 3 Saturdays a month, I could have it paid off by spring. Helen studied her husband's face, the earnest eyes, the hope she saw there. This wasn't about keeping up with the Joneses. This was about giving their children something he'd never had, a chance to see the world beyond their small town, to watch history unfold in real time. All right, she said finally, but we tell the kids they're getting practical presents for Christmas, socks and school supplies. George grinned and pulled her close. Have I told you lately you're the most practical dreamer I ever met? The RCA Victor console arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in November, delivered by 2 men in gray uniforms, who carried it in like it was made of spun glass. The mahogany cabinet gleamed. The round screen, all 7 inches of it, was dark and mysterious. Bobby, Susan, and Carol had been sworn to stay outside until the men finished the installation, but they kept peeking through the front window, their eyes wide as saucers. Does it work yet? Can we see? Mom said 5 more minutes. George tipped the delivery men $1 each, money he couldn't really spare, but it felt like the moment called for it. Then he called the children inside. They tiptoed into the living room as if entering a church. The television stood in the corner where the fern had been, its screen still dark. Helen had already rearranged the furniture. The sofa and chairs now faced this new altar. Can we turn it on? Susan whispered. George knelt by the set and twisted the dial. Nothing happened. He adjusted the fine-tuning knob. Still nothing. Then slowly, like dawn breaking, the screen began to glow. First a dot of light in the center, then expanding outward. Lines appeared, static, then a face, a man in a suit sitting at a desk, reading the news. Ladies and gentlemen, President Truman today announced. The children gasped. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. George felt his throat tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It's a real person, Carol breathed, right there in the box. Not in the box, sweetheart, Helen said softly. He's in a studio somewhere, maybe New York. But we can see him, right here in our living room. They stood there, all 5 of them, watching a man read the news. It wasn't particularly exciting news, something about farming subsidies and trade agreements, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the miracle of it. A voice and a face transmitted through the air, captured by the antenna on their roof, transformed into light and shadow on this glowing screen. Bobby reached out slowly, touched the warm glass with one finger. Don't get fingerprints on it, Helen warned, but her voice was gentle, distracted. She was as mesmerized as the children. That first night, they watched everything. The news, a variety show, a Western called Hop Along Cassidy, where the hero wore all black and rode a white horse. They watched until the station signed off at 11 o'clock. The national anthem played over a waving flag, and then the screen went to static. Is it broken? Carol asked, worried. No, honey, George said, reaching over to turn it off. They just don't show programs all night. They'll come back on tomorrow. The children trudged off to bed, too excited to sleep, already arguing about what they'd watch the next day. George and Helen remained on the sofa in the dark, holding hands. We did it, Helen said. We did.
What do you
George,
think this
what do you
means?
think this means?
For them, I mean, for the kids. He considered this. I think it means they'll see things we never saw, know things we never knew. The world just got a whole lot smaller. The television changed the Miller family, just as it changed every family that invited it into their homes. Dinner time shifted to accommodate Howdy Doody.
The children no longer played outside until dark. They rushed home for their favorite programs. On Sunday mornings, the family gathered not just for church, but for the afternoon football games afterward. George became a devoted fan, shouting at referees who couldn't hear him, explaining plays to his wife who wasn't entirely sure what a down was. Helen discovered cooking shows and afternoon dramas. The neighborhood women would call each other the next day to discuss what had happened on their stories. It gave them something to talk about beyond recipes and children's report cards. But something else changed too. The dinner conversations became a little quieter. The radio, once the center of evening life, gathered dust. The kids didn't run through the streets quite as much. The world had come inside, and inside became more compelling than outside. Helen sometimes felt a pang of loss for those evenings when Bobby would make up elaborate games with Susan and Carol, their imaginations running wild. Now they sat still, their faces illuminated by the blue-gray glow of the screen, passively receiving whatever entertainment it offered. But then she'd see Bobby's face light up during a science program, absorbing information about atoms and space travel, or Susan watching a ballet, her own hands unconsciously mimicking the dancer's movements, or Carol laughing at Lucille Ball's antics, that pure child's laughter that made everything worthwhile. The television was both a window and a mirror. It showed families across America who they were and who they wanted to be. It created a shared culture. Everyone watched the same programs, laughed at the same jokes, cried at the same dramas. For the first time, someone in Maine and someone in California could reference the same thing they'd both seen the night before. It made the nation smaller and somehow more connected, even as it made individual families more isolated in their living rooms. Today, we carry more computing power in our pockets than existed in the entire world when the Millers bought their first television. We stream thousands of programs on demand, skip commercials, watch whatever we want, whenever we want. The idea of a single antenna pulling 3 grainy channels from the air seems almost quaint, like something from ancient history. But it wasn't ancient in history, it was your history. Many of you watching this were there. You remember when the TV man came to install the set? You remember gathering around that glowing screen with your brothers and sisters, fighting over what to watch. You remember the special occasion of it all. Your mother making popcorn in the pressure cooker. Your father adjusting the rabbit ears to get a clearer picture. You remember when television was new. And in remembering, perhaps we can appreciate what's been lost along with what's been gained. That sense of wonder, that feeling of witnessing something miraculous. That understanding that technology wasn't just convenient, it was transformative, strange, and a little bit magical. The Miller's RCA Victor console, with its 7-inch screen and 3 channels, opened a door that could never be closed. It changed how we see the world and how we see ourselves. It brought us together and in some ways pulled us apart. But on that November evening in 1949, when George Miller turned the dial and the screen glowed to life, none of that mattered. What mattered was the look on his children's faces, the wonder in their eyes, the sense that they were witnessing the future. And they were. They absolutely were.